The Season 1 finale, the episode that was explicitly saved as the 25th episode milestone. The episode that Ben has actually been overworking himself on just to get right since Mario vs. Sonic. The episode that featured 2 abridged voice actors, Masako X from Team 4-Star, and It's Just Some Random Guy from the I'm a Marvel and I'm a DC series of videos from back in the day. This episode is one of, if not the longest death battle episode ever, clocking in at a whopping 32 minutes, which is longer than a lot of episodes released nowadays. And as of January 10th, 2023, Goku vs. Superman is officially 10 years old. So what better day to upload the first part of this ranking retrospective series than on the same day that this episode was published onto YouTube. After rewatching this episode for the first time after a few years, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I'm gonna take that sugar and use it to bake the most delicious cake I can, because this is easily the most amount of passion ever put into a death battle. Yes, this episode has Season 1 jank. Yes, the numbers are laughably bad and wrong. Yes, there is absolutely more to cover for both characters. And if any of that matters to you, that's fine. But speaking as someone who grew up with this series, it does not matter to me in the slightest. In fact, I'm just gonna give the score right now. 94 out of 100. Let's see why I'm giving this episode such a high score. Goku's analysis shows the type of standards that they're holding themselves to, pointing out any and all mistranslations, cover the differences between ki and magic, they explain what his transformations and powers do, they fully explore Goku's history and what he stands for as a character, and they even correct a few other misconceptions such as the one about instant transmission. And the end clip uses that iconic "ally to good, nightmare to you" line, which apparently contradicts with this character, though to be fair, they did cover this up in the sequel. And as for Superman's analysis, I'll admit it's not as good as Goku's, as they do poke fun a little more than what I remember, but at the end of the day, they still cover his powers, feats, and story extremely well, even citing a few other sources to help determine it. Oh, and would you believe me if I said that this episode was originally going to be 20 minutes longer just because of the amount of stuff they had to work with to determine the conclusion? Because this episode was originally going to be 20 minutes longer, but they had to cut it all out so that the episode was at a watchable length, which is even crazier when you remember that 32 minutes is still longer than most, if not every death battle episode, period. But on to the fight. And, okay, I'm gonna be real with you here. I've been using bullet points for the previous episodes and just kinda ad-libbing from there. But for this one, since the episode is officially 10 years old, the fight deserves a fully scripted rundown. I just need to make sure I have everything I want to say about this episode. I will admit the abridged section isn't that funny. Superman's is pretty straightforward, albeit kinda weird given some of the stuff he's saying with the lips. But, the Dragon Ball abridged bit is alright, at least once we get to Goku. The whole underwear chafing theme is kinda cringe. The transforming hedgehog is a neat reference, but kinda forced. But then we have Goku saying that he finally found somebody as strong as him, and Vegeta saying, that got a smile out of me. Then Roshi points out that he's an alien, and Goku goes over to fight him and stop him from destroying the planet. This is something I really like about the setup. They make Goku's motive based around his desire to fight someone stronger, but also adding a second ulterior motive that adds a setup that feels really natural. Superman is weirded out, but he's willing to fight anyway, because he's kind of accepted the fact that Goku is just gonna keep trying to fight him no matter what. Then we get the fight announcement. We get some of the trademark Jordan Lange rushdown attacks. We also get a visible difference in fighting styles, where Goku is relying on blitzing speeds and teleportation, and Superman is relying more on powerful blows, emphasized by a subtle ripple effect and some good sound design. Of course, Superman gets some rushdown attacks of his own, and he shows no issue in keeping up with Goku's speed, dodging his ki barrage and running circles around him when attacking with pressure points. And then what follows is,
Senzu bean. Want one?
No.
okay, I'll admit this part always makes me laugh. That's comedy gold right there. But this leads into Goku's first transformation into Super Saiyan. This shot of Goku blocking Superman's attack to reveal his stronger form and finally landing a powerful blow. There's no ripple effect on Goku's punches, and that's to emphasize how Goku needs to rely on Kaioken and his super forms to keep up in any way. Then we get a good Kamehameha scene with a well-delivered scream and an impactful blast that not only hits Superman, but also destroys the LexCorp building. Oh, LexCorp? Funny how this is what leads into the kryptonite scene. I mean, Lex is always making things with kryptonite, so it makes perfect sense that it be left in the remains. Nice touch! Goku's about to go for another attack, but notices that Superman isn't moving, so he destroys the kryptonite and says that he wants to beat him at his best. Great character moment right there. After that scene, we get back to the fight. There are some more rushdown attacks, this time with Goku getting the upper hand. Then he runs circles around Superman, who seems completely unfazed as he just casually walks up and punches him out. Superman then sneaks up on Goku by smashing a car on him. Okay. At least it leads to a campy pun. Goku transforms into Super Saiyan 2 and yeah, this is the weakest transformation scene of the episode. It's not bad, it's just very standard compared to what we've gotten before and what we'll get later. But now we get to see Superman's heat vision being used to dissipate Goku's ki barrage. Then he hits Goku with a lamppost, who responds with a power pull combo and extends it. Superman points out that the pole is made of magic, showcasing a moment of Goku being able to take advantage of one of his weaknesses, albeit for a time. And this is the moment where Superman finally starts to take the fight more seriously, where he zooms up to the sky and another part of the planet, which just so happens to be a Dragon Ball styled landscape. I used to find it weird that Superman just runs away during the fight, but I'd like to point out another attention to detail in this episode. Remember the scene where Goku blows up the LexCorp building? You notice that Superman has not been doing that? I mean, yeah, he does punch Goku through a few buildings, and he does attack him with a lamppost and someone else's car, but even then, he's dealing as little damage to the city as he can, whereas Goku isn't shown to have much issue punching through even more buildings or even blowing them up. Not to mention that Superman has been pretty casual throughout the fight up to this point, with It's Just Some Random Guy, who I'm going to refer to as Michael, delivering a confident yet calm demeanor in his voice, and with his animations looking more casual for the most part. But now that he's finally starting to take the fight more seriously, emphasized by Michael's more menacing deliveries, he's moving the fight to a new location as far away from the city as possible, not just because his overwhelming power would easily destroy it, but also because he knows that Goku would be fast enough to catch up to him. And he still gets caught off guard by Goku's instant transmission! What follows is Superman yeeting the power pole away so that Goku can no longer use it in battle, forcing Goku to transform into Super Saiyan 3, with a few light effects and a great scream from Masako. Then Goku gets another beatdown with some decently satisfying looking spin kicks before teleporting him and spinning him on the floor and crashes him into a mountain. Goku notices that he's running out of super forms and tries to read his mind, which Superman claps back with a well-delivered line and a combo that launches Goku back on the ground, causing a crater. And then Goku uses a solar flare before it's revealed that it didn't actually do anything.
My turn.
The area begins to distort, but as it turns out, this was not Superman's doing. This was Goku powering up into Super Saiyan 4. Not only is this the best transformation of the episode, but unironically one of the best transformation scenes of the entire show. The reality distortions, the music, the jarring shift in Masako's voice, even Superman's quirky one-liner being delivered with a sense of feeling impressed. They clash a few hits and suddenly burst into blinding speed, with Goku literally breaking out of it, and Superman using his ice breath to slow him down. But Goku is struggling to get out and then BOOM! Does a combo that launches him upwards with a horizontal kick? I get that it's supposed to be a sweep kick, but given that he's technically floating in the air, I don't get that impression at all. Regardless, we finally get to see Superman struggling against Goku. He tries to get to the sun, but Goku chases him down with another Kamehameha. Superman responds with another strong blast from his heat vision, leading to a glorious looking beam struggle with colors that are decently different. Goku's giving off a dark pinkish hue, and Superman's being a lot more scarlet. Ultimately, Goku wins the beam struggle, and that struggle was so big that it uses up all of Goku's power and is forced to revert back to base form. But it's not over. Goku notices that Superman is taking a sun bath and uses the sun power to restore his energy. It's a nice break from the rest of the fight that also showcases a similarity between the two and how they're able to restore their energy via suns and stars. The music builds up to yet another beam attack where Goku attacks with the energy he gained from the sun, his Super Saiyan aura eventually eclipsing the sun and blasting a beam with an amplified Kamehameha sound effect. Superman flies right through it and drags him to the center of the earth. Ooh, those effects look so gorgeous! And then Goku's able to power up into Super Saiyan 4 and both deliver their strongest attack. This leads to the music and sound effects being cut off completely, making the impact of the planet blowing up that much more impactful and jarring. Masako gives out a good death scream and Superman is completely knocked out, but he's still able to just barely open his eyes. Very slowly, but he still opens them. What follows is the first outro clip of the series, which would be included in almost every episode up until around season 4. But in this one, knowing that the planet he has sworn to protect is destroyed, he just flies away, finding a way to restore it or maybe even find a new planet to protect. What follows is the conclusion. Yeah, it's a very flawed and outdated conclusion, using some very old numbers. I mean, who knew? Flawed and outdated research is flawed and outdated. But still, they put a lot of work into this conclusion. It goes in depth, directly separating the character's power, lifting strength, durability, and speed. In any other episode, they just compare them simultaneously, but here they distinguish them separately. They also go over various factors and why certain strategies were iffy or just wouldn't work. Goku's stats are definitely determined with a more in-depth approach, however, creating an entirely separate formula just to find those numbers. And going off script for a bit, I highly recommend checking out the Road to 100 blog for this episode specifically. Not only does it add some insight into the episode's production, but it also answers some questions that a lot of people had back in the day, as well as for Goku vs. Superman 2. Also, I've been using the Road to 100 blog as a source for many episodes in this season, as well as many more episodes that I'll be covering later down the line. I'll leave all the ones I cite in the description. Obviously, we have a much clearer idea of what those numbers would actually be, but keep in mind that this was long before versus debating and calcs became as accessible as they are today. Plus, they say that at the end of the day, those numbers don't matter, because they have a perfectly thematic conclusion. Both characters are meant to inspire us, but for different reasons. Goku has the power to break any limits, but Superman has no limits in the first place. You might see this as a no limits fallacy, but they defend it by citing a source that says Superman is as strong as he needs to be. No matter what feats, calcs, or strategies you put into the matchup, the core of their character is what matters most. This is not the best Death Battle episode. I'm definitely gonna cover ones that I like more, but this is certainly Death Battle's magnum opus. There's a good reason why this is by far not just the longest Death Battle episode, but the one with the most views, and a like to dislike ratio that— oh, right, I forgot about that. Back when this episode was first released, people were not happy with Goku losing, birthing the notorious Death Battle Debunk genre of videos. But keep in mind, the debate back then kept going back and forth, and there were those people who genuinely believed that Goku should have won. They might still be around nowadays, but they're not as prevalent, at least as far as I'm aware. Not everyone was as knowledgeable with the DC comics as they were with the Dragon Ball anime, so the full context of Superman's power wasn't available to everyone on the fly. Hell, it wasn't even available to the Death Battle team for some time. Nowadays, people are far more aware of how busted Superman is, but this episode was a huge turnoff for various Dragon Ball fans and even some other people. But that said, even if you think Goku should have won, this is far from the most incorrect Death Battle episode. It's not even the most incorrect of the season. I have a minimum of 2 hands worth of episodes that I can say are more wrong, by both Death Battle's logic and by the common opinion of versus debaters. Unfitting like to dislike ratio aside, the amount of passion put into this episode cannot be overstated enough. This isn't just a good episode of Death Battle. This isn't just a masterpiece. This is an iconic relic of early 2010s media. Not bad, Ben. Not bad in the slightest. Wait, this next one is Ben's least favorite episode he's ever worked on? Before we get into the actual episode, I'd like to talk about how this episode was marketed, as well as the quote-unquote Death Battle curse that plagued the first Goku vs. Superman. The Battle of the Gods movie was announced during the production of the first episode, and although it was released in Japan a couple of months afterwards, it still added a new super form that people thought would change the outcome, but it didn't come into play at all by the final product. As for the marketing, it was supposedly being promoted as a rematch, even though Ben claims that it was meant to be a continuation, not a re-examination. I can understand why he'd want this to be a continuation. Like it or not, Goku vs. Superman was a massive video on YouTube. Never mind a Death Battle episode. And due to the fact that they've established previous matchups can get a second look, of course people wanted to see a Goku vs. Superman 2. And giving the supposedly misleading marketing, this led the Dragon Ball community to believe that they were gonna let Goku win. And if people cry enough about it, they will start thinking that Death Battle hates a certain character, with their only source of evidence being that they lost their Death Battle episode. This contextualizes the script a lot to me. Just before the episode aired, the script had to be quickly changed to add in the whole, no, Goku is awesome, we love Goku, Superman's just broken as shit. And you see this mentality continue to impact every Dragon Ball episode of the show to this very day. They make Dragon Ball look like peak fiction in comparison to everything else, but if one of those characters lose, then they're all like, no, we love Dragon Ball. Don't let this outcome distract you from the fact that we love Dragon Ball a lot. And surprise, poor attempts at coddling the fanboys doesn't actually work. And it's because of all of this that I don't think Death Battle should do any more rematches. They've done 4 of them. One was a tribute to a close friend that helped Death Battle get in the successful position that they're in today, but never changed the outcome. 2 of them actually did change the outcome due to the characters having more in their arsenal to talk about thanks to newer games or changes in how they'd research characters. And then there's Superman vs. Goku. Aside from Mario vs. Sonic, this is the only rematch that exists entirely because of fan demand. And while people would like to see more rematches, given that they've done literally everything they could possibly do with the rematch, every single one of them going forward would either end up being a Mario vs. Sonic, or more egregiously, a Goku vs. Superman. In these entire analyses, I could tell that they secretly just did not want to make this episode. Remember when I mentioned that there were 20 minutes of cut content that had to be removed from Goku vs. Superman 1? That all went into this episode apparently. And it really feels like they're just trying to pad out as much of it as they can, especially with the whole tangent of everything anime being inspired by Journey to the West, as well as the difficulties in how anime was translated over to America. Though to be fair, it does have its pros. I like how they mentioned that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster altered Superman's story based on their personal experiences. But other than that, these really are just 2 respect threads from characters they already talked about. But hey, at least the animation's good, right? Well, let's find out. The start of this animation does feel like a continuation of Goku vs. Superman 1, with Superman finding the 7 Dragon Balls and summoning Shenron to restore the Earth, which includes Goku, who just randomly calls for a rematch. Oh, and a side note, I feel like Masako X sounded like he was having an off day. The Kamehameha scream is weak, his other screams aren't that good except for the final Kamehameha, and his other line reads aren't read very well. Thankfully, it's just some random guy is able to keep up the same level of quality that his Superman had in the first episode, particularly with Superman's "Neither have you." But I really don't like the part where he's bragging about his own power. It feels very out of character. And I get it, he's warning Goku that he's this ridiculously powerful individual that he has no chance of beating. But you don't get that impression until Superman starts bringing up that it is his burden to bear and that Goku should be glad it's not his. In fact, Superman has plenty of other issues in characterization, but this canyon fight is clean. And alive playing during this part? This is great. But it doesn't take away from my biggest problem with this episode. It's not at all conveyed in the context of a fun sparring match. It's not even conveyed as an episode of Death Battle at all. It's conveyed as if they're fighting for the sake of it and it becomes a heated debate. Plus, unlike in the first episode where I mentioned the detail of how he tried to deal as little damage to the city as possible, even leaving it entirely the moment he starts taking the fight seriously, now he's doing more damage to the city than even Goku. Here, Superman has no trouble crashing Goku through buildings or even just outright making them explode. Although I would like to point out that they crashed through the SGC building. During SGC, they had an admittedly really funny moment where they had 2 cosplayers fighting each other. You can't find this in the episode on Death Battle, but it was live streamed, so thankfully I can show it to you here. But other than that, Superman just not caring about the city and literally taking the fight to the city feels even more out of character. At least Goku's characterization is a little bit better. Okay, never mind, his is just as bad but in completely different ways. But of course, I need to talk about the final scene. Superman walking through the Kamehameha is iconic. It's genuinely a beautiful shot. And I like how the death has a story reason behind it, and Superman's "I'm sorry" is so well delivered. And with how he carries Goku's body in a matter of respect, you know, for all of this faults, I'm glad that it ended on a positive, uplifting note.
I believe this is the part where I say, "I told you so."
Okay, I take back everything I said. F the King Kai scene, and f the conclusion repeating these exact words verbatim. Like, why? Oh, and there's also this notorious line.
He is not meant to be relatable. He is not meant to lose.
Other people have pointed out that this is just blatantly disrespecting or at least misunderstanding Superman, and I agree, but there's actually a much worse implication that makes me outright hate this episode way more than I thought I would. You know what this conclusion says to me? It says that this episode doesn't feel like a fight that gives a single about the characters. This doesn't feel like Goku versus Superman 2. This feels like an elaborate tribute to the debate of the matchup rather than the characters involved with the matchup itself. And yeah, that is a weird thing to say because Death Battle's supposed to be about the debate, but at least they acknowledge that it's a debate between two characters, not just two functions. Though this does go into the mind-numbingly common criticism that Death Battle doesn't care about the characters, despite the fact that yes, they do. Yeah, their representation is rarely perfect, but they still try to make them look as cool as possible, be it through some fun dialogue, a unique exchange of abilities, smartly woven references to their home series, etc. They even tried to make them look cool in the analyses, be it covering their backstory in ways that may or may not be interesting, bringing up feats that make them look powerful, or feats from other characters in their series to show that they are just as powerful as them, on top of many other things they could do in the analyses. But this episode, along with Starscream vs. Rainbow Dash and Ragna vs. Soul, feel like the exceptions to the rule. I mean, Goku vs. Superman 2 technically doesn't even have character rundowns. Just some brief histories as to why they exist, not even just what they do in the series, just the fact that they exist. And then they go straight into the history of the debate, which yeah, it's pretty neat, but why would you not want to cover any cool story beats or developments that they've obviously had in their series, given how long they've been running? Hell, it's even implied that they're using a specific version of Superman. Why would they not try to compare him to other versions of Superman? And that's to say nothing as to the changes in Goku's character. Yeah, there might not be a lot of it, but it should still be enough to bring up in the analysis. And then they tried to put on the whole man who can break any limits versus man with no limits that they had from the first episode, and no, you don't get to do that. The first episode exudes love for the characters and the series they come from, with them literally saying that the analysis is gonna be more in depth than ever before. On top of passionately discussing their backstories and all sorts of endearing compliments and even some lighthearted jabs at both characters. On top of the 10-minute, 29-second animation, which is still longer than every Death Battle episode, period. But the sequel's animation is only 6 minutes and 21 seconds long, which don't get me wrong, is still a long time by Death Battle standards, but it's not even the 5th longest in this very season. The whole limits monologue in the first episode, first of all, was technically a monologue, and second of all, was a nice little note to end on top of the abundance of research they've done for this episode, in spite of how flawed it may be by today's standards. But here is just further insinuating the fact that they've made their point and they don't intend to change it, so shut up. I really wasn't expecting to talk about this episode for this long. I was intending on giving it a 50 out of 100, saying, yeah, the disrespect and misunderstanding of Superman is tasteless, but at least Goku was handled pretty well and the animation was great. And while the latter may be true, in the grand scheme of things, the former isn't, so it just accentuates all of these messages. So I'm not gonna sugarcoat this score. 35 out of 100. I'm just disappointed. I mean, this was supposed to be episode 50. Aired at SGC due to fan demand. Yet truth be told, this was pitiful. Death Battle, stop making me do the YouTuber side challenge. Oh, wait. People are actually happy to see this episode? Even the people who doubted it ended up changing their minds on it and called it a masterpiece? Well, I didn't expect that, but alrighty then. Roll it. Who would have thunk that Goku vs. Superman 3 would make everybody happy, even if you do see the occasional person insisting that they only made this for money. They just love milking Goku vs. Superman. That shouldn't mean anything. Death Battle haters learn to make a single good criticism challenge. Impossible! To those who are gonna ignore me disrespecting their bad faith criticism and comment that baseless rhetoric anyway, y'all gotta keep in mind that Goku vs. Superman 2 is Ben Singer's least favorite episode of the series. I did a pretty good job on touching upon that, but it has been quite a while, so for a brief recap, his problems had less to do with the episode's overall quality in the animation, and more to do with how it was marketed. Ben wanted it to be more of a continuation, as well as to include the remaining research that they did for the first episode. But the problem was that his boss was a grifter even before he started playing between favorites with the right side of the eagle, so the marketing pushed it as a rematch instead. That, and Ben intended this to be his final word on the matchup, which meant Goku vs. Superman 3 would never happen.
Cowards!
Cowards? I don't think that guy can handle a third one. You want Goku to lose again? Do you really want that?
Yes!
I mean, it still technically didn't. Though the supposedly irrelevant sequel actually did convince most people that Superman is stronger than Goku, but then along came Donkey Kong, who took his finger and went... Despite initially being accused of being biased towards Superman, as it turned out, they were biased against Superman. Season 8 was around the time where more people started to call out the irrelevant sequel's disrespect towards Superman. He may have won, but saying that Superman is boring is dead ass one of the first things they say about him in the episode, barring any obligatory name drops. Moments like this didn't just lead to people thinking Goku can never beat Superman, but this also led to a lot more people misunderstanding Superman, and to an extent DC superheroes in general, especially since the episode aired just before people had a weird fetish for making Superman evil, be it through a character or their own garbage take on Superman. I recommend checking out Shady Durags' video if you really want to see what a well-written Superman truly looks like. And hey, he directly blames Death Battle for the common folks' misunderstanding of Superman, pointing out how they tried so hard to sugarcoat Goku losing a second time that they ended up constructing a whole-ass narrative that Superman was boring, along with how they misunderstood why Goku would be boring with Superman's power. Finally, a good Death Battle criticism that I didn't come up with on my own. This idea was on Ben Singer's mind since the start of the decade. While the irrelevant sequel eventually tried to go for an understanding of the characters, it was not proof-written at all. No joke, he shoved it in 2 days before the episode premiered out of panic, which, funnily enough, added to the disrespect of Superman because there was clearly more effort put into saying how great of a character Goku is, and then go, that's right, Boomstick, Superman is like this, the end. And to add on to that, Death Battle in general was starting to make people believe that DC characters are just these unstoppable and broken superheroes who can never lose in a fight against people who aren't from Marvel. I mean, it's hard to exclusively blame Death Battle given how DC was being treated in non-comic book media, but given how prominent its footing was planted in internet culture, it emitted a gas that lit so brightly that it kickstarted a near decade-spanning arms race of people outright hating DC characters and acting like they have no personality. Back then, this was widespread across the internet as comic books started becoming less topical, even spreading to the Death Battle team for a time. Though thankfully, Ben and other Death Battle team members learned to appreciate Superman more and more while never once losing their respect for Goku. And yes, the self-proclaimed free thinker will still call this a cash grab, even after hearing me explain all of this. But the real ones will notice that, above all else, this episode was Ben Singer's passion project. He didn't just want to give this matchup one more shot, he wanted to do the characters justice, explicitly as its own thing, disconnected from the original classic and its sequel. And in this situation, I'm giving it its own fully scripted rundown. Not so much because I want to give it one, but it basically deserves it, let's be real. And that's because of one reason. What if I told you that they once again worked in the whole man who can break any limits versus man with no limits to break in the first place idea from the other Goku vs. Superman videos, but were much more subtle about it and done in a way that actually respected the characters instead of trashing on one of them unintentionally? In fact, let's talk about this rhetoric real quick, because I feel like I've been ignoring the implications of it for far too long. Despite being done twice before, Ben always believed the summary to be a simplification of both characters despite being accurate to the debate. In the original classic, they linked this sentiment as the core of their characters, but by doing that, they failed to notice that the Riddler left a few gaping holes in the script. Like, what limits does Goku need to face, and why does Clark not need to deal with those limits himself? What do you mean Superman has no limits despite putting a finite number on his power? However, I still stand that this does work as a thematic note to end off the conclusion, because, as outdated as it may be, the research was still extensive enough to justify having one, which means that this idea represents what those numbers mean. Also, this was the first time they tried tying one of these bows on a package, so naturally, it'd be really clumsy, and I can't imagine a reason why you still be so passionately distasteful towards it today. Though, I definitely agree that this rhetoric is not strong enough to be used as the crux of a debate, which is exactly why I criticized Death Battle for trying to pull this a second time with even less substance instance. They brought up all of these new feats for Superman, but completely ignored any and all new feats for Goku, despite him receiving new feats and forms that helped him take down stronger opponents, and despite being heavily involved in the marketing of the episode, even going as far as to putting those forms on all versions of the thumbnail. And as I mentioned before, the whole conclusion and ending Q&A feels like an insecure versus debater feeling the need to repeat his points in bad faith, rather than someone naturally expanding on his opinion. And given how a bunch of this episode consisted of research that was cut from its predecessor, I consider all of this to be yet another major failing of this episode. I still think it can work as a summary of the characters when handled well, but the question is, how do you handle it well? Simple. Keep it in the analyses. Goku's analysis focuses on his training and feats, but it's done in a different way than normal. They actually start off with the creation of Dragon Ball and how Goku left an impact on anime and manga, even pointing out Goku's uncommon strength. And then they cover his training under Roshi, where we see this little gem of an Easter egg. Oh, and by the way, the Death Battle team actually thinks this and will die on that very hill. No joke, they have unironically tried arguing this in external articles. But I love that. And it's almost like these guys are big fans of Dragon Ball or something. Oh yeah, and there's also this cute callback to the original classic.
Within just a few years, he was so strong, the only worthy teachers left were gods. And a talking cat, but mostly gods. At 15, he was already so powerful that the only worthy teachers left were gods. And a talking cat, but mostly gods!
And then they go into Saiyan physiology with the whole what doesn't kill you makes you stronger sort of thing, explaining how quickly Goku mastered Roshi's various techniques like the Kamehameha, and starts by covering small-scale feats like dodging lightning. I really just called lightning dodging small scale. They also cover the differences from the old English dub like the first two episodes, which you might think is just there for baseless trivia, but the last time they mentioned it was a mistranslation, they forgot to clarify what the actual phrase was supposed to be. And that's where this quote comes in, where they finally elaborate on the original quote pertaining to Goku accepting his Saiyan heritage. I guess it would have been more interesting if they saved this for the end of the rundown after building up to how Saiyans are inherently violent, but this is supposed to be an analysis that blends in story analysis with trivia, or at least it makes sense to do so given how the older episodes had separate focus on character and background information, especially with the second one almost exclusively focusing on trivia. So with that context, I think it's appropriate. And as for the build-up on the training, it's not necessarily about numbers this time around, but rather the build-up is about the transformations and who he's defeated. They start by mentioning how Goku's golden forms allowed him to defeat Frieza. Then they bring up the power multipliers, and then the part where he became a god. Also, threw us for a loop? I'm sure they did. And said god form is explained by the fact that the Dragon Ball universe got bigger! Is this gonna be the new Thor speed meme? And then they say how he matched Beerus in power. And then they bring up Hit, Infinite Zamasu, Jiren, bringing up their immeasurable power and use the Ultra Instinct form as a means of explaining how he surpassed said power. Going over things like how much faster he's gotten to a point where Ultra Instinct pushes his limits and automatically blocks and or dodges all attacks thrown at him. And then they elaborate on CC Goku and why he should be comparable to the normal Goku, mentioning even more insane feats of defeating powerful foes. Okay, that was a lot to unpack, and some of it was just, oh hey, this is what they wrote. But that's kind of what they say at the end. Goku doesn't just inspire other anime, he inspires people to go further beyond and break any limits. Oh, and also I really like the editing. Obviously you have some snazzy looking manga edits, specifically this dodging one, like, ooh, this edit is so fucking good, man. But the sound design is exclusively comprised of Dragon Ball sound effects, which even as a Dragon Ball hater, makes me feel very nostalgic. And then there's Superman's analysis. You're probably not asking, wait, if Superman being limitless is the point of this analysis, how is that not disrespectful? Well, let's get into that. It is similar to Goku in how they start off with small-scale feats, and then they add that iconic classic quote of his speed and power.
Geez, just a locomotive? People in the 40s needed bigger imaginations.
That they poke fun at. They generally frame Superman as a simple solution to overwhelming problems. I've heard that this is kind of a simplification of his origin and story, but I've also heard that it's a good way of simplifying it, so it's fine. After all, it's yet another deep dive into a story that mentions his creators' upbringings and what led him to become the first superhero, briefly explaining his story and even taking shots at Zack Snyder's bad take on Superman. Based. Though this isn't the only misconception they discuss, however, as they also go over the mind-numbingly common criticism of his lower scale feat happened to Superman, and there are plenty of others that have happened to Superman, so he's very clearly not multiversal. So you're saying you want Death Battle to make the Ben versus Hal mistake again. Why is this criticism a thing? And that's the question Death Battle asks as well, because they acknowledge the compositing problem by providing evidence that the comic book composite is kinda canon. They mostly cover the vast array of crazy powers he has that don't get used in the fight, but the straightforward ones he's most known for have some elaboration, specifically the heat vision. Instead of just saying that it's hotter than the sun for a third time, Wiz literally says that his powers defy physics, and they go into detail about that, each feat getting more and more bombastic and ludicrous. But despite this, Ben claims that Clark still has limits, so what are they? This is where they put a lot of emphasis on the mental blocks he built in his mind after finding out about his Kryptonian heritage, both being used to explain why he restrains his power so much and why post-crisis Clark was considered weaker than his pre-crisis self. And what's interesting is that this is technically also used to parallel Goku's training, adding a neat contrast where Goku had to work towards his overwhelming power while Superman had to learn how to control it. And another thing is that they outright bring back the weaknesses tab. You want to know the last time we saw one of these? Donkey Kong vs. Knuckles, all the way back in 2015, where they also mentioned their stupidity.
I really hurt my finger doing that bit.
Yeah, no, I saw.
As for why it didn't show up in Goku's rundown, I theorize it's because it would have been incongruent with how Death Battle was analyzing his story, and having it show up at the beginning may have been a bad look given how Link vs. Cloud 2021 was received when it tried something similar. Meanwhile, they did this for Superman because they wanted to best avoid the rhetoric that Superman has no limits, which I guess is also incongruent with how the team personally scales Clark, but they framed the man without any limits idea in a different way. They say that while Superman's power should have a limit, what doesn't have a limit is how he's willing to use his powers to help others. He's always using his power for things as small as saving a cat from a tree, or things as big as shattering a multiverse with a single punch to stop his multiverse from being replaced. His absolute power does not have to corrupt him absolutely, as he still chooses to use his powers for the good of the people. In other words, Clark needed to bypass those mental blocks to become a simple solution to overwhelming problems. And by Martel, this fucking background music is golden. It's a no copyright piece called Gesture of Celebration A. And hearing it during the World Forger feat and having that get followed up with the ending spiel about who Superman is, just out of this outerverse, my guy. Legitimately the best use of music in any Death Battle analysis since TJ combos. But of course, we gotta see if this debate truly ends once and for all, where the fight begins in media res.
Shut up!
They give a line of context for why they're fighting, which makes this fight feel like it just started.
Today's the day. We'll finally settle who's stronger.
If you say so.
I like seeing Superman humoring Goku to fight even though he doesn't like fighting, so he keeps holding back the entire time. And I guess it's a little weird to see Clark not feeling reluctant outside of his "if you say so," but sometimes you gotta give them a reason to fight. Though I will say, I don't fully love Xander Mobus as Superman. I don't think it's bad, and he does act like Superman more often than not, but with his voice, I just keep hearing his Joker for some reason. It also feels a bit stuffy in some areas.
I'm doing just fine. All right, I'll show you just how powerful I really am.
Just a bit. I still think it's a pretty good performance overall, but Michael Kovac as Goku, however, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I like it more than Sean Schemmel's. I'm dead serious. I truly think that Michael Kovac is a better Goku than, well, Goku himself. Even with his stellar performance as Goku Black, I wasn't fully convinced that he could do it. And I especially wasn't fully convinced during Gogeta vs. Vegito. I still don't understand why you would want to step away from Moscow X's Goku only to have Goku do a less impressive Moscow X. But geez, talk about a redemption arc. My only complaint is that he slightly overdoes the chuckles, but other than that, this is among my favorite performances in the show. The screams, the peppy dialogue, the confidence and wholesome deliveries. Hell, by the end of the fight, he pretty much turned into Goku. I normally show distaste for this phrase, but I think it's fair to say it here. Funimation, hire this man. Assuming he's not too busy being in pretty much every indie cartoon you can find. And it's not just the voice acting that makes this fight for me, but the individual character moments as well. It fixes the main issue I had with the original sequel where they made this fight wholesome. Clark gets to relax and let loose without fear of hurting someone, and Goku's loving the challenge of a unique style and move pool. They fight, but it feels more like a celebration of skill and power. They're laughing like children throughout, trading compliments, being wait a minute. I also like this smile from Clark. I know that it's supposed to be separate from the other two episodes, but there are moments that feel like they are connected, at least spiritually. And in that lens, this smile is a moment of Clark feeling impressed by Goku's speed, and Goku smiles back as a means of saying, hey, now that I've gotten better, let's have some fun. And then Goku starts noticing that Clark's holding back, and Clark responds with,
I'm doing just fine.
Still seeing this as a modest sparring match at most. I also really like the Kryptonian fabric exchange just because it feels like a nice change of pace. Seeing Goku impressed with Clark starting to give it his all, noticing how his suit doesn't get destroyed nearly as easily as Goku's gi, and also this exchange.
Oops. Well, I guess we can wish it back later.
World made of cardboard.
Okay, full disclosure, this is actually my least favorite part of the episode. Look, I get the idea behind it. It's meant to be a unique way of escalating the fight, and now that I think about it, the World of Cardboard reference would have fit perfectly well in the original sequel. But my problem is that it goes from Clark going, I forget how uncontrollable my strength is. I need to remember to be more careful. And then the very next sentence, I'll show you just how powerful I really am. I would have preferred Goku to notice his sympathy and have them travel to a universe that's completely empty, and the rest of the fight plays out like normal. Then again, that'd probably either be too much work or it wouldn't be enough to suspend the viewer's disbelief since they'd have to reuse assets. So if these are the lines we gotta work with, I would have just altered it like this.
World made of cardboard.
Well, I guess we can wish it back later.
All right, I'll show you just how powerful I really am.
Same idea, but Superman's enthusiastic tone comes across as a lot less jarring. I mean, maybe you'd have to alter a delivery or two, but otherwise, this is how I think it should have been structured. Now that I'm mentioning it, Superman's characterization is a criticism I've started seeing pop up, especially among comic book fans. And I don't think it's without reason. This might be a crazy take, but if this matchup didn't have the legacy it did, I don't think many people would like it that much. You have Son Goku, the martial artist who seeks the thrill of a fight to become stronger each day, versus Superman, a character who abhors fighting and is just a normal guy who happens to be astronomically powerful. So seeing him going all out like this and not even being fazed that they destroyed the multiverse is out of pocket, even more so than in the irrelevant sequel. Okay, let me explain. I did hear on the grapevine that Goku blowing up the LexCorp building is pretty out of character for him, and okay. But if you take that one moment and remove the detail of it being the LexCorp building specifically, you've just described about 80 to 90% of the action and choreography in the original sequel. And also, that not meant to be relatable jargon is worse than anything and everything this new episode did, but in terms of how he was represented as a fighter, him taking the fight to the city is forever bad. Okay, but other than that, using the Dragon Balls to restore the planet and immediately escaping to a frozen tundra knowing that Goku would want a rematch, and giving Goku multiple opportunities to stand down are more in line with Clark's character than we give it credit for. Though, for the record, this doesn't change my score of the episode in the slightest, as, if anything, this makes Goku's characterization retroactively worse since he comes across as a stubborn baby who can't take no for an answer, but I digress. Even in the original classic, he was far more hesitant to fight and eventually took the fight to an empty area once he started taking things more seriously. But here, while I think Clark's representation is better than those two episodes, his characterization, I think it leaves much to be desired. However, while I get where this criticism comes from, I can see why the team wanted it to be more, for lack of a better term, destructive. As I said in my Season 2 ranking retrospective, the entire episode felt more like a tribute to the debate rather than the matchup. So people seeing Goku dying via some brain disintegration after seeing Goku doing all of this, it's pretty underwhelming on paper, and maybe even disrespectful in a way. Or at least, that's how Ben felt. So this, to me, feels more like a moment of them going, hey, we gotta have them acting at least a little bit out of character because, you know, this is Death Battle, and giving us a scenario that Superman and his fans have probably never seen before. And unlike with Saitama, I don't think there's a frame of reference for what this could look like. But this isn't a huge deal to me personally. I just want to explain why you see this criticism popping up in various circles. Oh, and just before anyone asks, Goku's characterization is much better than the other two fights. Yeah, he too has the weird, I'm a destroy planet with no remorse despite the fact that I'm going against an aspect of my character shtick, but seeing him being more upbeat, encouraging his opponent to fight at their best, and using his L as a learning experience to grow stronger rather than refusing to back down are very in line with his character. That was quite a lot to unpack, once again, but I only went into so much detail because admittedly, the rest of it, while very good and flashy, especially this funny shot right here, doesn't have much to talk about aside from, ooh, ah, unrendered Superman, where'd you come from? But it's not inherently a bad thing. It's just that I'm comparing this fight to an episode like Trunks vs. Silver, where the admittedly basic action is heavily carried by the sheer amount of adrenaline with the gorgeous effects, top-notch voice acting, and blood-pumping music. Goku's auras look stunning, and even Superman's heat vision looks really, really nice. And the super flare looks good too. Even if the textures could use a little more detail, it doesn't bother me that much. I also noticed that they included a little bit of Torian influence here and there. Impressive. Very based. Although there is one thing that you think I'd skim over. The music. Was that the best title you could come up with? Is great. Logan Adams helped Brandon write the lyrics, and it's meant to be Goku explaining why he likes fighting and alleviating Clark's worries as he helps him cut loose. I wouldn't call it my favorite track of the season, and Hedge of Tomorrow and Princess of Pride still hold the title of my favorite Dragon Ball tracks, but I think it's real epic. Not to mention, it has the best musical moment in the series. In this moment, Clark used up a lot of his power after the super flare. We even see him briefly tired out, so he powers up by traveling to every sun he can find across the universe. And in this moment, Goku sees the stars getting put out. No joke, they're actually getting put out in this shot here. Nice detail. Finally, he's going all out. He's ready for Clark's full potential. And in this moment, there's nothing to lose. And in this moment, we hear 4 little words. And then they do a reenactment of the climax of the original Goku vs. Superman, but with Goku using Kaioken and the Ultra Instinct avatar to power it up, throwing everything he's got. But Clark's power ultimately destroyed him, and the planets, and the universe, and I'm pretty sure all of reality in general, and this blink and you'll miss it shot of Galactus vs. Unicron. But then we see them in the afterlife. Not sure why Clark's here with Goku since he didn't die from that, but whatever. Still, Clark thanks Goku for a good fight, Goku accepts his loss while vowing to train harder, and they fist bump at the end as they stare at the different versions of their fight happening across the multiverse. Oh, hi, Scooby and Courage. Although it does beg the question, Drake? Where are the Dragon Balls? But screw it, let them have their moments. I won't lie, when I saw this the first time, I teared up a little. Although I have heard some people say that Clark saying that Goku almost had him was disrespectful. Fellas, is it disrespectful to enjoy something? And then there's the conclusion, which goes in-depth in a similar fashion to the first episode. Ultra Instinct's comparable to the Theta State? Really? They cover 5 different categories, throw Goku a bone by giving him the skill category, and also this.
Fighting Zamasu as an omnipresent merge timeline also implies immeasurable speeds. Also implies immeasurable speeds. Immeasurable speeds. Immeasurable speeds. Immeasurable speeds.
They said it, boys! They finally said it! They put Goku at immeasurable, they directly said it out loud in an episode. I don't want to see this screenshot being used to slander Death Battle ever again. There's officially no reason to be bothered by this anymore. And you also gotta appreciate how they specifically say how Ultra Instinct is able to keep up with Clark in terms of speed, and how the animation lines up with that argument by having Goku blocking and dodging all of Clark's attacks in this form, as described in the analysis, and even start dealing significant damage to Clark's cape, as well as put him on the back foot and force him to use the super flare. Which, by the way, the original sequel never used, despite hyping it up as a big thing. I also like the other callback to the original, where Boomstick starts off saying how they don't have to hear about it again, only to immediately backtrack by saying how people are gonna argue the outcome regardless. But there is this one last thing that's worth mentioning. It ends with Wiz going into another spiel about what Goku and Superman represent as characters, but it adds a bit of a twist where sometimes it's not fun to see Superman win because of what these icons symbolize. Then he starts having a bit of a crisis where he questions if he is watering down characters to something unconventional, but Boomstick snaps him out of it and says that they're just doing it for fun and it's just another way of enjoying fiction. And then they get into a petty squabble over Boomstick's pun, and they show the winner card with Superman smiling down on them. And a side note, the DC comic artist who made this panel knows about this and he gave his approval. Absolutely based. This whole bit resonated with many people, myself included, but sadly, it's not all good things with this. Like, they say that comic book superheroes have stagnated over the years, which makes no sense to me, because Death Battle has stated the literal opposite on more than one occasion. So I don't understand why they're saying it here and acting like anime has never stagnated itself. And there's also the whole who wants Goku to lose thing. While I get the idea behind it, it's kind of extreme. I've also heard other people say that it's sappy, maybe even a little pandering, and it didn't need to be here, and there are other smaller problems with this monologue that can build up over time. And yeah, I would dock points for all of that as well. if the episode was written by anyone other than Ben Singer. I often hear the argument that, as a consumer, it's not your job to care about behind-the-scenes context or the struggles that a creator's going through. While that's a perfectly fine point in a vacuum, if said consumer wants to look into those aspects, they can retroactively find a lot more to like about it. Take it from me, I've done so much digging into what happened in all of those older episodes, especially when it came to Goku vs. Superman. So to me, this ending is more of a creator sharing his personal experiences with doubting his own work, but came around to loving it again because he was able to find a way to have fun with it. And that's the main reason why this ending stuck with me as much as it did. I mean, there are other reasons, but at the risk of copping out, I can't bring myself to explain them. I guess it just validates longtime Death Battle boomers like myself. But now there's one question I think needs answering. Is this better than Goku vs. Superman, the original sequel? Is it better than the original classic? On a technical level, 2023 won before the word context was even conceived. The quality of the editing, research, and animation are so much better. But do I like it more? The conundrum here is that Ben wanted this to be separate from the other Goku vs. Superman episodes, and while you can make multiple points of cohesion between them all, it's still trying to be its own thing. The way I like to break them down is that one episode wanted to be an event, while the other wanted to be a passion project. Both are special in their own way, but a passion project is one you can appreciate at any time, while with an event, you kinda needed to be there to get full enjoyment from it. But I was. I don't think it's that unpopular of an opinion at this point, but I do still prefer the original classic. Primarily because of nostalgia, I'll own up to that. But I do believe that it had more going on. Wow, who would have thunk that a 10-minute fight would have more content than a 4-minute fight? But I also think that the first one had more creative action, more ambitious cinematography, and even better voice acting despite the mic peaks. At least for Clark. Kovac is still the definitive Goku to me at this point, but the action in this fight is kind of, samey. A lot of it is just fast-paced rushdowns, ki blasts, and heat vision. Obviously, I wasn't expecting any of Clark's Toon Force sneezing or any of his other wackier powers, but no Frost Breath, no pressure point combat? Really? I feel like all those abilities are iconic enough to where you could have used them in the fight. I also think that the Super Saiyan transformations are kind of worse overall, because of 2013's aforementioned cinematography and how it feels like Goku really needed to power up to match Clark, whereas here Goku just kind of transforms because it looks cool. Like, as much as I adore the effects, why did Goku become blue here? The only transformation I feel comes close would be the Ultra Instinct one, but I will also say, generally speaking, this is the definitive Goku vs. Superman death battle, even if it's not my favorite. For what it wants to do and what it's trying to do, it's a very solid 8 out of 10 episode. But for what it speaks to me, a longtime Death Battle fan who has done copious amounts of research and analysis from multiple angles of Death Battle, specifically during Season 10, this episode means more to me than a lot of others do. Arguably rivaling that of my actual favorites like Dante vs. Bayonetta, Balrog vs. TJ, Jack vs. Afro, and yes, even Guts vs. Dimitri. So as a compromise, it only feels right to give this episode an 89 out of 100. But there are many people who consider this to be one of, if not the all-time best episode in this series. And even if I don't agree with that, I can see why. Not bad, Ben. Not bad in the slightest.